In this episode, we are examining 4 incidents involving captive killer whales at marine parks and the victims who worked with them. All 4 of them are as horrific as they can get and involve the same animal. As always, viewer discretion is advised. It was November 29, 2006. Shamu Stadium at SeaWorld San Diego was full for an evening performance. Thousands of people had paid to watch the killer whale show. What they watched instead was a 10-minute attack on a senior trainer that should have killed him, and which every major television network in the world was running within 24 hours of the footage being made public 6 years later. Ken Peters had worked at SeaWorld for years. He was experienced, composed, and had performed with Kasatka, a 28-year-old female orca, hundreds of times. Kasatka had been at SeaWorld since 1978, captured off the coast of Iceland as a 1-year-old calf. She had been moved between SeaWorld parks 14 times in 8 years. By 2006, she had a calf named Kalia, who was being kept in a backstage pool separated from her mother on the evening of November 29th. Orcas in the wild are matriarchal animals. Mothers and calves remain together for life. In the wild, Kasatka would have been the center of a family group. In Shamu Stadium, her calf was in a pool she could hear but not reach. At approximately 7:29 p.m., during a routine performance behavior, Kasatka grabbed Ken Peters by his right foot and pulled him underwater. The footage shows it happening between one frame and the next. Peters in position for a trick, Kasatka beneath him, then the grab and the downward pull with no transition. Kasatka held Peters at the bottom of the pool. She brought him to the surface. She pulled him under again. This sequence repeated multiple times over the following 10 minutes. Each time Peters surfaced, he can be seen on camera attempting to calm her, patting her body, staying loose, not fighting, not struggling against her. His training had taught him that panic escalated these situations and that calm de-escalated them. He applied that training while being repeatedly drowned in front of thousands of people. Trainers on the pool deck threw a weighted net into the water to try to distract or contain Kasatka. The footage shows her ignoring it completely. Researchers who later reviewed the incident noted that Kasatka's calf Kalia had been calling from the backstage pool throughout the performance. A former SeaWorld trainer who worked there at the time, David Kirby, later documented that Kasatka had been able to hear her calf in distress and could not reach her. The attack began, in Kirby's account, as Kasatka's frustration reached a breaking point during the performance. Peters eventually freed his foot. He swam for the side of the pool. Kasatka turned and followed him at speed. Peters, with a broken foot and puncture wounds in both feet from the bites, got over the safety net at the pool edge, with Kasatka hitting the net from beneath. A moment after he cleared it, he survived. He later testified at the OSHA administrative hearing that he had been confident Kasatka would let him go if he remained calm. Judge Ken Welsh, who watched the full 15-minute footage during the hearing, described it as chilling and upheld all charges against SeaWorld. SeaWorld stated afterward that the only safety change made following the Peters incident was ordering trainers not to swim with Kasatka and 2 specific other orcas. Trainers continued performing in the water with all remaining killer whales at all 3 SeaWorld parks. 4 years later, at SeaWorld Orlando, a 40-year-old senior trainer was killed. It was February 24, 2010. The Dine with Shamu experience at SeaWorld Orlando had finished. The paying guests were finishing their lunch. The formal session was over. Dawn Brancho was 40 years old. She had been a senior trainer at SeaWorld for 15 years and was regarded by colleagues as one of the best in the industry. Meticulous, calm, and deeply knowledgeable about every animal she worked with. She taped almost all of her own shows so she could review them afterward to improve her performance. She had worked with Tilikum that afternoon. Tilikum was 29 years old. He was 22 feet long and weighed 12,300 pounds. The largest orca held in captivity. He had been involved in the deaths of 2 people before this afternoon. SeaWorld had never publicly disclosed this history to visitors. He had been kept in relative isolation from the park's other orcas and was not a whale that trainers entered the water with. For the post-show interaction that followed the Dine with Shamu session, Dawn was working with him from the slide-out. the shallow ledge at the pool's edge where trainers positioned themselves for close contact without entering the main pool. Todd Connell, a visitor from New Hampshire at SeaWorld with his wife and son for the boy's 10th birthday, filmed 7 minutes of Dawn's interaction with Tilikum from the audience area. The footage shows her at the slide-out, petting Tilikum's tongue, scratching his rostrum, conducting what appears to be a completely normal post-show positive reinforcement session. Nothing in the 7 minutes of footage suggests that what is about to happen is about to happen. Todd Connell shut his camera off seconds before the attack began. Tilikum grabbed Dawn Brancho by her left arm while she was in the slide-out position. The sheriff's report documents the initial contact as her arm. He pulled her into the pool. Dawn tried to swim away from him. The surveillance footage, reviewed by investigators, showed her making multiple attempts to reach the side of the pool. Tilikum prevented her from reaching the wall each time. Other trainers on the pool deck attempted to call Tilikum to a different position using fish buckets and the recall signals he had been trained on. He did not respond to any of them. Staff dropped a weighted net into the pool. He continued to hold Dawn. Tilikum held her underwater, surfaced with her, descended again. The attack was prolonged across multiple cycles of this. Staff activated the emergency separating gates to move Tilikum to a different section of the pool. He moved, but took Dawn with him. Staff were unable to recover her while Tilikum had her. When staff finally managed to position Tilikum on the lift platform to raise him partially out of the water, he still had Dawn Brancho in his mouth. Staff physically pried his jaws open to recover her body. Dawn Brancho was pronounced dead at the scene. The Orange County medical examiner documented the cause of death as drowning and blunt force trauma. The autopsy found a broken jaw, a fractured vertebra, a dislocated arm, and a dislocated leg. Her scalp had been partially separated. Tilikum had held her and shaken her repeatedly throughout the attack. SeaWorld's initial public statement attributed the incident to Dawn's ponytail, having attracted Tilikum's attention, and described it as an accident. Eyewitness accounts contradicted this immediately. The sheriff's report documented an attack that bore no resemblance to SeaWorld's public description. The OSHA investigation found SeaWorld liable for exposing trainers to recognized hazards without adequate protection and issued a $75,000 fine. SeaWorld appealed. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the OSHA ruling in 2014. From that point forward, SeaWorld trainers were no longer permitted in the water with killer whales during performances. Tilikum died of a bacterial lung infection on January 6, 2017. He was 35 years old. The SeaWorld surveillance footage of the attack remains in the possession of the Orange County Sheriff's Department. It has never been publicly viewed. It was February 20, 1991. Sealand of the Pacific was a marine park built on a floating barge in Oak Bay Marina in Victoria, British Columbia. It housed 3 killer whales: Tilikum, an 11-year-old male who had been captured off the coast of Iceland at the age of 2, and 2 older females, Haida II and Nootka IV. All 3 animals lived in a pool that researchers would later describe as severely inadequate. Overnight, the whales were confined to a 20 by 20-foot holding module to prevent the public from accessing them after hours. Kelty Byrne was 20 years old. She was a competitive swimmer from Victoria and a part-time marine mammal trainer at the park. She was a psychology student at the University of Victoria. She had no formal marine mammal training certification. Sealand hired athletic young people with swimming backgrounds and trained them on the job. The afternoon of February 20th was the final session of the working day. Kelty was walking along the poolside when she slipped and fell into the pool. All 3 whales were present. She surfaced near the wall and tried to grab the pool edge. One of the whales pulled her away from the wall before her hands could secure a hold. She was pulled underwater. She surfaced again, screaming. Audience members who had been watching the session described the moment of realization that this was not part of the show as arriving slowly. Nothing had prepared them for it. Staff on the poolside called to her, tried to reach her with poles and life rings. They could not get past the whales. There was no emergency procedure in place at Sealand for a trainer in the water. Nobody had planned for this. Kelty was pulled under a second time. She surfaced briefly, then she was gone. The 3 whales passed her body among them for several hours. Staff were unable to recover her. The official cause of death was drowning. Kelty Burns' body was recovered late that evening. Sealand of the Pacific closed permanently shortly after the incident. The park's owners made the decision themselves without being ordered to. Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld Entertainment in Orlando, Florida. He arrived in January 1992 and remained there for the next 25 years. It was July 6, 1999. SeaWorld Orlando closed at the end of the day, and staff completed their closing procedures. The park emptied out. Tilikum was alone in the pool at Shamu Stadium, where he had been kept in relative separation from other animals since arriving at SeaWorld, following the Kelty Burn incident 8 years earlier. Daniel Dukes was 27 years old, from a rural area of Georgia. He had no known connection to SeaWorld and no documented history with marine animals. Investigators reconstructed his movements from physical evidence. He had purchased an entry ticket and entered the park during normal operating hours that day. When the park closed, he did not leave with the other guests. At some point after the park closed, Daniel Dukes made his way to the Shamu Stadium. His clothing was found folded in the park. He had removed everything before entering the water. There were no witnesses. There was no camera covering the pool at night. There was no alarm system that detected his entry into the water. The first indication that something had happened came the following morning, July 7th, when SeaWorld employees arriving for the early shift found Daniel Dukes' body lying across Tilikum's back. The medical examiner's report documented bite marks and injuries across the body, consistent with orca contact. The cause of death was listed as drowning and hypothermia, consistent with an extended period in the cold water overnight. SeaWorld did not publicly disclose the incident for several days. No charges were filed in connection with the death. No publicly disclosed changes to the overnight security protocol at Shamu Stadium followed. Tilikum had now been directly involved in 2 human deaths in 8 years. He remained in SeaWorld's programs. 11 years later, in the same facility, he killed Dawn Brancheau.